Alright, what's up everyone? Welcome to the channel. So listen, we need to talk about Sisu Road to Revenge. And I'm not gonna lie to you. I have been absolutely obsessed with this movie since I walked out of the theater back in November. Like, I literally went home, sat on my couch, and just stared at the wall for 20 minutes, trying to process what I just watched. This is one of those films that grabs you by the throat in the opening minutes and doesn't let go until the credits roll. And even then, you are still catching your breath. We are talking about a sequel that not only lives up to the original Sisu from 2022, but in a lot of ways actually surpasses it. And I know that's a bold claim because the first Sisu was already this insane. Blood-soaked masterpiece of pure Finnish rage and determination. But Road to Revenge takes everything that worked about that film, cranks it up to 11, and then breaks the dialogue completely. This is not just a sequel, it's an escalation, it's a refinement, and honestly, it becomes one of my favorite action films of the decade. The cultural impact of this film might not be as massive as something like John Wick or Mad Max Fury Road, but within the action movie community, within the circles of people who genuinely love this genre, Sisu Road to Revenge has become this cult phenomena where people are just losing their minds over how good it is. I mean, the movie opened with $2.6 million, which yeah, is actually down from the first film's 3.3 million. But here's the thing, this is a Finnish action movie with the silent protagonist going up against Wicked for Good in theaters. The first fact that it's getting any theatrical release at all is kind of a miracle, and the people who showed up, the people who bought tickets, we all walked out of those theaters feeling like we just witnessed something special. So, why am I sitting here about to spend the next 2 hours talking about an 88-minute action movie? Great question. Here's the thing, Sisu Road to Revenge deserves this level of analysis because it's operating on multiple levels that most people, even fans of the film, might not fully appreciate on the first viewing. On the surface, yeah, it's this gloriously violent revenge thriller where a basically immortal Finnish bats murder his way through the entire Soviet Red Army while transporting his dismantled family home across the border. That's the elevator pitch. That's what you tell your friends to get them to watch it. But underneath that blood soaked exterior, there's this incredibly thoughtful meditation on grief, on displacement, on what home even means when everything you have ever loved has been taken from you. There's a reason this movie has a 95% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 76 on Metacritic. Critics are recognizing that director Jalmari Helander is not just making mindless action Sherlock here. He's crafting something that has general emotional weight and thematic depth while also delivering some of the most creative, brutal, and just plain fun action sequences you will see all year. Most people who watched this movie walked away thinking, that was awesome. I loved all the explosions and violence, which is totally valid, but they are missing so much of what makes this film truly great. The way Helander structures this movie into 7 chapters, each one escalating the stakes and the absurdity, the way he uses Atham's silence to create this almost mythological character, the way Stephen Lang's villain is given just enough depth to make him tragic without ever making him sympathetic, all of that requires unpacking. By the end of this video, I want you to see this movie completely differently. I want you to understand why this works when so many other action sequels fail. I want you to appreciate the craft and the thought that went into every single decision, from the cinematography to the sound design to the pacing. So here's what we are gonna do over the next couple hours. We are going deep, I mean really deep, into every single aspect of this film. We are gonna break down the story act by act, scene by scene, in some cases talking about what's happening on the surface, but also what Helander is doing thematically and emotionally. We are gonna analyze every major character, and this is most important because even though Tammy does not speak a single word in this entire movie, there's so much character development happening through action and expression. We are gonna talk about the themes, the symbolism, the deeper meaning that elevates this above standard revenge thriller territory. We are going to examine the filmmaking craft, the direction, the cinematography, that absolutely killer score, the screenplay structure. We are gonna look at the box office performance, the critical reception, what audience thought, where this fits in the broader action genre landscape. We are gonna do some detailed scene breakdowns of the most important moments, talk about Easter eggs and details you definitely missed, address the controversies and debates around the film, and ultimately, I'm gonna give you my full verdict with ratings across every category. This is gonna be comprehensive. This is gonna be thought. And Jay, spoilers, obviously there's gonna be massive spoilers throughout this entire video. So if you have not seen Sisu Road to Revenge yet, stop right now. Go watch it. It's streaming. It's availability digitally. Go experience it for yourself and then come back. For everyone who's already seen it or doesn't care about spoilers, let's go. And hey, if you end up enjoying this deep dive, do me a favor, hit that like button, drop a comment letting me know what you thought of the film, and subscribe if you want more long form analysis like this, because I love making these videos and your support makes it possible. Okay, so let's set the stage here. Sisu Road to Revenge, also stylized as Sisu 2, which is kind of clever, is a 2025 Finnish action film written and directed by Jalmari Helander. It's a sequel to 2022 Sisu, which was the surprise hit that came out of nowhere and just absolutely destroyed people's expectations. The original Sizzle made about $14 million worldwide on a teeny budget, and it built this really passionate cult following of people who were just hungry for more. Now, the interesting thing about the development of this sequel is that Hollander has said in interviews that the idea came to him while he was renovating his apartment. Like, he is literally pulling apart his own space and rebuilding it, and that sparked his concept of Atami dismantling his family home and transporting it to safety. That's such a perfect example of how real life can inspire fiction in these unexpected ways. The Finnish Film Foundation initially granted €50,000 in support, but that eventually increased to €1 million, and the total budget for the film ended up being around 11 to $12 million, making it one of the most expensive Finnish films ever made. That's significant because it shows real institutional support for this franchise, recognition that Helander was onto something special. The movie premiered at Fantastic Fest on September 21st, 2025, and the reaction for there was apparently insane. People were just going nuts for it. Then it got a theatrical release in the United States on November 21st, Thanksgiving week, in about 2100 locations, which is significantly wider than the first film but still pretty modest for an action movie. It was going up against Wicked for Good, which is obviously a totally different audience, but still that's tough competition. Now, personally, going into this movie, I had really mixed feelings. I loved the first season. I thought it was this brilliant exercise in minimalist storytelling and maximum violence. But I was also skeptical that a sequel was necessary. Like the first film told a complete story. Atami got his revenge, he got his gold, he walked off into the sunset with his dog. Where else is there to go? And I think a lot of people felt that same hesitation, that same worry that this was just gonna be a crash grab, a studio wanting to milk a successful property without having anything new to say. But man, I was wrong. The second I saw that opening sequence, the second we got that narrator explaining the post war displacement of Finnish families, Karelia, I knew Helen had a real story to tell here. This was not just let's do the first movie again. This was a genuine continuation, a deeper exploration of who Atami is and what drives him. My first viewing experience, I watched it in a nearly empty theater on a Tuesday afternoon because I wanted to avoid crowds, and even in that quiet space with maybe 10 other people scattered around. The energy was electric. Every major action beat, people were reacting. Every brutal kill, you would hear these grabs or nervous laughs, and that ending, which we will get to. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I got a little emotional in a movie about a silent Finnish commando murdering hundreds of Soviet soldiers. Helander found genuine humanity, and that's special. Alright, so let's get into the actual story, and I'm gonna walk you through this pretty much scene by scene because there's so much happening even in the quieter moments. The film opens exactly like the first one did, with this historical text on a screen explaining the context. We are in 1946, 2 years after the events of the first film. World War II has ended. Finland has been forced to cede the Karelia Reign to the Soviet Union as a part of the peace agreement, and thousands of Finnish families are being displaced, forced to leave their homes and resettle on the Finnish side of the new border. The narrator's voice is somber, almost mournful, and there's this line that just hits like a punch to the gut. Most would never see home again. That sets the emotional tone for everything that follows, this sense of loss and displacement and the impossibility of truly going home. Then we cut to our protagonist, Atami Karpi, the man himself crossing the Soviet border with his Bedlington Terrier, that same scruffy dog from the first film. He's got travel documents, he's moving through checkpoints, and there's this immediate tension even though nothing's happened yet. The Soviet guards are watching him, suspicious, but they let him through. And here's what I love about this opening. Highlander does not waste time without unnecessary exposition. We don't need a recap of the first film. We don't need characters explaining who Atami is. If you are watching this sequel, you already know, and if you don't, you will figure it out real quick. Atami drives his massive truck to the ruins of his old family home, and this sequence is honestly beautiful in its simplicity. It's just this one methodically dismantling the wooden structure of the house where he used to live with his wife and 2 sons before they were murdered. He is marking each beam, each plank, organizing them in a way that will allow him to rebuild this house exactly as it was. As there's something so deeply sad about watching this. This is not just salvaging lumber. This is him trying to preserve a memory, trying to hold on to the last physical connection he has to his family. The house is basically all that's left, and he's gonna transport it piece by piece across hostile territory to rebuild it somewhere safe. That's the entire emotional core of this movie right there. Meanwhile, we cut to the Siberia, to this frozen hellscape of a prison, and we meet our villain. Igor Dragunov, played by Stefan Lang, is being released from his cell by a KGB officer played by Richard Brake. Now, Richard Brake, if you don't know, is one of those character actors who just excused menace. He was in stuff like Doom, Hannibal Rising. He's got this face that's simultaneously charming and terrifying, and in this movie, he is perfectly cast as this bureaucratic Soviet officer who sees atomy as a problem that needs to be eliminated. He knows that Dragunov was the one who murdered Atami's family during the Winter War, and he knows that this is what created Kosashi, which is what the Soviets call Atami. Kosashi, by the way, is this figure from Slavic folklore, essentially an immortal being who hides his soul outside his body so he can never truly be killed. It's the perfect name for Atami, this guy who just refuses to die no matter what you throw at him. Dragunov is offered a deal: hunt down and kill Atami, and in return, he gets a pardon and his freedom. And Stephen Lang, man, he looks rough in these early scenes. His emaciated hollow hide clearly been thorough hell in this prison, but there's still this intensity in his eyes. This barley contained. The KGB officer gives him resources, soldiers, weapons, aircraft, tanks, basically the entire weight of the Soviet military apparatus, all directed at the killing one old Finnish prospector. That's how dangerous Atami has become in their eyes. He's not just a man, he's a symbol, a legend, and legends need to be destroyed. So we are set up now, right? Atami alone, except for his dog, transporting his family home across Soviet territory. Dragunov, the man who killed that family, now tasked with finishing the job and killing Atami himself. It's pure, distilled revenge narrative, but what makes it work is specificity of it. This is not abstract vengeance. This is deeply intimately personal, and we feel that weight from the beginning. Chapter 2 is titled Old Enemies, and this is where the action really kicks off. Atami is driving his truck, this massive vehicle loaded down with all these carefully stacked wooden planks. And the Dragunov catches up to him with a small squad of soldiers. They surrounded the truck, preparing to execute Atami right there. But Atami, because he's Atami, senses the danger before it happens. The violence that erupts here is sudden and brutal, exactly what you want from this franchise. Atami kills most of the soldiers, using the truck itself as a weapon, and there's this moment that's so perfectly Looney Tunes in its execution where he runs over one guy halfway, then guns the engine so body flies backward and smashes thorough Dragunov's windshield. It's gross, it's funny, it's shocking, it's everything. After killing most of the squad, Atami actually has a clear shot at Dragunov, aims his rifle right at him, and then doesn't fire. He doesn't recognize who this man is yet. He is just some Soviet officer not worth the bullet. Atami leaves him alive and drives away. Now, this moment is crucial because it's established two things. Atami does not kill indiscriminately, he only kills when threatened or when seeking specific revenge. And two, it sets up the dramatic irony that will fuel the rest of the movie. We know who Dragunov is, we know what he did, but Atami does not. That knowledge gap creates tension. Dragunov regroups, hooking up with motorcycle units, and we transition into chapter 3, Motor Mayhem, which is probably my favorite extended action sequence in the entire film. This is Helander doing his best Mad Max Fury road impression. And I mean that as the highest compliment. These bikers are chasing Atami through the wilderness, and the cinematography here is just stunning. Wide shots of this massive truck barreling down dirt roads, nicking up dust, surrounded by these motorcycles that are trying to get close enough to take him down. One biker manages to shoot Atami in the face. The bullet right through his cheek, and Atami doesn't even slow down. He just keeps driving, bleeding, focused entirely on the task at hand. The kills in this sequence are insanely creative. Atami crushes some bikers with the truck, shoots others, and my personal favorite, there's one guy who gets beheaded by a piece of lumber that swings out from the truck bed. It's so over the top, so cartoonishly violent, but it works because Helander commits to it completely. There's no winking at the camera, no self awareness, just pure committed action, filmmaking. An explosion forces Atami to stop and put out a fire that's spreading through his precious lumber, and this moment is important because it reminds us what's at stake. He's not just trying to survive, he's trying to protect these pieces of wood that represent his entire family. Chapter 4 Incoming is where things escalate from motorcycles to goddamn fighter jets. Soviet illusion I-12 attack aircraft are deployed to hunt Atami down, and the sequence that follows is legitimately breathtaking. Helander and cinematographer Micah Orasma create these gorgeous wide shots of planes streaking across the sky, dropping bombs, and this one truck just trying to outrun them. Atami takes shelter in an abandoned barn, but the pilot starts bombing it. And you can feel the desperation here, the impossibility of the situation. How do you fight back against attack aircraft when you are just one guy in a truck? Well, if you are Atami, you use the environment. He drives through the woods, and when one jet comes into close, its wing clips a tree, and the whole thing crashes in spectacular fireball. Another pilot ejects from his plane and lets the aircraft fly directly at Atami, and this is where we get one of the most iconic shots in the movie. Atami shoots one of the straps holding lumber, hits the brakes, and the several planks of wood fly forward, creating this makeshift ramp that redirects the jet upward for just a second before it crashes. It's physically impossible. It defies every of physics, but it looks so cool that you don't care. More bombing runs force Atami to drive off a cliff into the ocean, and the truck is destroyed, sinking into the water. But Atami survives because of the course he does, and he managed to save the wood by fashioning it into a raft. He and his dog float to shore, exhausted, wounded, but still moving forward. Chapter 5 is called Long Short, and this is where the movie gets really interesting thematically. Atami stumbles upon a derelict Soviet tank just sitting abandoned in the wilderness, and he gets an idea. He wants to get this tank over the Soviet border checkpoint, but obviously he can't just drive it through, so he uses dynamite to create this explosion that catapults the entire tank through the air in a 360-degree somersault over the checkpoint. Now, when I first saw this scene, I actually laughed out loud because it's so absurd, so completely diverse from the reality. But again, Highlander sells its thorough pure conviction. The tank doesn't this perfect flip through the air, it's majestic, and then it's land and explodes, and Atami is severely injured in the blast. He is lying in the rubble, barely conscious, and this is the lowest point in the movie, his darkest moment before getting captured by Dragunov's forces. Atamis takes a knife and buries it in his own wounded flesh. This will be important later, trust me. He's taken aboard a train bound for Siberia, the same prison where Dragunov was held, and Dragunov decides to make this personal. He has Atami tortured, and then, in this absolutely chilling monologue, he reveals who he is. He describes in detail how he killed Atami's family, how his oldest son tried to fight back and nearly took out Dragonov's eye with a knife, and how he used a shovel to murder them. This is the moment where Atami finally understands who this man is, and you can see it in Jorma Tomilia's eyes. This rage, this renewed sense of purpose igniting inside him. Dragunov thinks he is broken Atami, thinks he is won, but he is actually just given Atami exactly what he needed, clarity and motivation. Chapter 6 is simply titled Revenge, and holy hell does it deliver. Atami breaks free from his restraints using that knife he buried in his leg earlier, pull its Grotsky, but also somehow bats movement and immediately starts killing guards. One guard tries to escape by jumping off the moving train only to get killed by a tree branch, which is darkly hilarious. Atami slicks his hair back with blood, this iconic image that's all over the marketing, and then begins moving through the train cars. Now most of these cars are filled with sleeping Soviet soldiers, and Helander turns incredibly tense sequence that's straight out of Buster Keaton's silent comedy. Atom is trying to move thorough without waking anyone, stepping carefully between sleeping bodies, and the camera lingers on faces, on weapons, on possibility that any one of these guys could wake up at any second. When one soldier doesn't spot him, Atami throws a pickaxe with perfect accuracy, killing him instantly. Another soldier gets stabbed in his sleep. There's blood dripping from the upper bunk onto the soldier below, and when that guy wakes up and sees what's happening, it's too late. In the final car, Atami steps on broken glass, that classic horror movie drop. But instead of being caught, he just keeps moving because he's unstoppable at this point. All of this is building toward the final confrontation between Atami and Dragunov. They fight aboard the train, and Dragunov is surprisingly formidable. He is not just some bureaucrat, he is a soldier himself, and Stefan Lang brings real physicality to the role despite being, a 70-year-old actor. Dragunov grabs a shovel, the same weapon they used to kill Atami's family, and tries to use it against Atami now. There's poetic justice in this, the weapon of murder becoming the instrument of the murderer's doom. But the Dragunov doesn't know that Atami has already rigged a Soviet missile that's attached to the train. When Dragunov asks if Atami has any last words, Atami simply spits out a screw from his mouth, the screw that was holding the missile in place, and the look on Dragov's face when he realizes that's about to happen is priceless. He tries to run, the missile stops right in front of his face for this agonizing second, where he thinks maybe he survived, and then it detonates point blank, consuming him completely. The explosion rocks the train, creates his massive shockwave, and Dragunov is just gone. Obliterated. It's satisfying in that deeply primal way that great revenge movies always are, seeing the villain get exactly what they deserve. But here's where Sisu Road to Revenge differentiates itself from a lot of other revenge thrillers. The ending is not just about violence and vengeance, it's about hope and community. We get chapter 7, which is not given a title card beyond final chapter, and we see Atami has made it to Finnish territory. He has begun rebuilding his family home, placing those carefully marked beams and planks in their proper positions, reconstructing this physical memory of his loved ones. He is alone, working in silence, his dog beside him, and there's something almost meditative about watching him work. Then a group of Finnish men approach, and Atami immediately tenses, reaching for a weapon because his instinct after everything he's been through is that people are threats. But the lead man raises his hands in peace and says, They want to help him build the house. Atami is visibly moved, tears forming in his eyes, and this is the first time in the entire movie, hell in the entire franchise, where we see him emotionally vulnerable in this specific way. He spent so long fighting, surviving, killing that simple human kindness surprises him. These men from the community start helping him rebuild, and the final shots of the film are framed like photographs. These still images of Atami and his new neighbors working together, creating something rather than destroying. It's beautiful, it's hopeful, and it's provide genuine closure to Atami's journey in a way that feels. Let's talk about Atami Karpi because this character is fascinating to me on so many levels. He doesn't speak a single word in this entire movie, not one line of dialogue, and yet he's one of the most fully realized protagonists in recent action cinema. That's all Jorma Tommila's performance. Tommila, who's in his 50s, has this incredibly expressive face that can convey rage, determination, pain, sadness, exhaustion, all without saying anything. His eyes do so much work. When Atami is focused on a task, you can see the single minded intensity. When he is remembering his family, there's this deep well of grief that flickers across his features. When he is fighting, there's this almost detached professionalism, like he is not enjoying the violence, he is just very, very good at it. What drives Atami is incredibly clear even without dialogue. He is motivated by love for his family, by need to honor their memory in the only way he knows how, which is rebuilding their home. Every action he takes is in service of that goal. When Soviet soldiers attack him, he kills them not because he wants to, but because they are obstacles between him and the completion of his mission. There's no sadism in how Atami fights. He is efficient, brutal when necessary, but never cruel for the sake of cruelty. His character arc across this film is about moving from pure survival and task completion, reconnecting with his humanity and his community. At the beginning, he is isolated alone, interacting with no one except his dog. By the end, he is expected help from his neighbors. He is allowed himself to be part of something larger than his personal quest for revenge. Memory, that's growth, that's genuine arc. Now, what makes Atami compelling to watch is this contrast between his apparent mortality, all the damage he takes, all the wounds he suffers, and his absolute refusal to stop. He gets shot in the face, he gets blown, he gets beaten and tortured, and he just keeps going. That's the meaning of Sisu, untranslatable Finnish word that means something like stubborn determination in the face of impossible odds. Atami embodies that concept completely. His best moments in the films are often the quietest ones. There's a shot early on of him carefully marking each piece of wood from the house, and you can see the reverence with which he handles these materials. There's the moment when he buries the knife in his own leg, knowing he will need it later, the foresight and pain tolerance that requires, and of course, that final scene where he moves to tears by simple kindness. Those moments showcase depth of character that most action heroes never achieve. And there any moments for Atami? Honestly, not really, which is a testament to how well written and well acted he is. If I am being nitpicky, you could argue that his superhuman durability sometimes undercuts tension because we know he is going to survive anything. But I would counter that by saying the tension in these films is not about whether Atami will survive. It's about how he will survive, what creative method he will use to overcome each obstacle. Jorma Tommila's performance is phenomenal. He is not doing big, showing acting, he is doing this incredibly internal physical work where every movement, every gesture, every facial expression has to communicate something because he has no words to fall back on. In the behind the scenes material, Helander talks about how Tomila would sometimes do or 40 takes of a single shot just to get the exact right look in his eyes. And that dedication shows. Atami is relatable in the sense that he is grieving, he is lost, everything, and anyone who's experienced loss can connect with that fundamental pain. He is not relatable in terms of his compatibilities or his pain tolerance, obviously, but that core of grief and the desire to preserve memory that's universal. Compare Comparing Atami to other action heroes, he is closest to Mad Max, especially the Wayun from Fury Road. Both are silent, both are traumatized, both are dragged into conflicts they would rather avoid, both are seeking some form of peace or redemption. But Atami is every more minimalist than Max. Max at least talks occasionally. Atami has committed fully to silence. He's also got shades of John Wick in terms of the retired killer dragged back into the violence archetype, but where John Wick is stylish and almost balletic in his violence, Atami is purely functional. There's no style points, just effectiveness. My personal connection to this character is rooted in that grief aspect. I have never lost family to war, obviously, but I have lost people, and the idea of trying to hold on to physical objects as a way of preserving memory, of keeping people alive in some small way. That resonates deeply. When I watch Atami carefully rebuilding that house, I feel that. It's not just action movie stuff, it's generally emotional storytelling. Now let's talk about Stephen's Lang, Igor Dragunov, because this is one of the most effective villains I have seen in an action movie in years. And a lot of that comes down to Stephen Lang's commitment to the role. Lang is 73 years old and he's playing this emaciated war criminal who has been locked up in a Siberian prison and he sells it completely. In the early scenes, he looks genuinely starved, desperate, but there's still this fire in his eyes. As the film progresses and he is given resources and soldiers, you see him physically transform, becoming more confident, more dangerous. What makes Dragunov effective as a villain is that he is presented as Atami's dark mirror. Both men are soldiers, both are survivors of the Winter War, both have been shaped and traumatized by violence, but where Atami fights to preserve memory and honor the dead. Dragonev is motivated by pure pragmatism and the desire for freedom. He does not particularly care about killing Atami, it's just a job he has been given, the price of his pardon. That makes him dangerous in a different way than a villain who personally invested. He is professional, methodical, willing to throw infinite resources at the problem until it's solved. Dragonov's motivations are really interesting when you dig into them. Helander has said in interviews that he wanted to give Dragunov a tragic backstory, that he was likely an orphan himself, that he is being used as a tool by the Soviet government, his internal life, that he is probably not happy about the things he's done, but this is the only life he knows. That adds layer to the character without making him sympathetic. We understand where he is coming from. We can see the tragedy of a man who's never had a home or family of his own, who's only know how to destroy, but we never forget that he murdered Atami's wife and children, that he is irredeemable. This scene where Dragunov reveals what he did, describing the murders in detail, is chilling. Stephen Lang plays it's with this almost fond reminiscence, like he's recalling a particularly difficult job he completed successfully, and the casual cruelty of that, the complete absence of remorse, makes him hateable in exactly the right way. His best moment as a villain is probably that monologue scene on the train. He's got Atami restaurant. He's one and he's swearing it, explaining exactly how he created this legend, how these actions turned Atami into Koshare. There's pride in his voice, but also this underlying resentment, like he knows that in killing Atami's family, he created something far more dangerous than he could have imagined, and now he has to clean up his own mess. Stephen Lang delivers every line with this grilled intensity, his voice recipe from years of cigarettes or whatever his character's deal is, and it's just captivating to watch. As for whether he's an effective villain, absolutely yes. He's not as instantly iconic as, say, Hans Gruber or the Joker, but within the context of the story, he's perfect. He's a genuine threat. He has a personal history with the protagonist. He has the resources to make Atami's life hell. And he has just enough depth to be interesting without ever becoming sympathetic. Comparing him to other action movie villains, he reminds me a bit of Rutger Hauer in Blade Runner, that combination of danger and sadness. Or maybe Ed Harris in The Rock, a competent military man who's ultimately serving the wrong cause. My opinion on his effectiveness is that Lang elevates what could have been a stock villain into something memorable, and that's all you can ask for. The supporting cast in this movie is intentionally minimal because the focus is too tightly on Atami and Dragunov, but the few characters we get are well utilized. Richard Brake plays the KGB officer who recruits Dragunov, and Brake, as always, is fantastic. He's only in a couple scenes, but he brings his bureaucratic menace to the role, this sense of a man who views human lives as numbers on a spreadsheet. His best contribution is setting up the stakes, explaining to Dragunov and to the audience why atomy is such a problem for the Soviets, how the legend of Koschei has grown, how soldiers are genuinely afraid of this one man. Brick delivers all this exposition in a way that feels natural and threatening rather than clunky. Then there's the dog, Atami's Bell Bedlington Terrier, whose functions almost as a sporting character. This dog is with Atami thorough everything, survives explosions and gunfire and plane crashes, and serves as this reminder of Atami's remaining humility. The dog doesn't fight, doesn't do tricks, it's just there, loyal, a loving connection to the first film and to the Atami's life before all this violence. In the final scene, the dog is resting beside Atami as he rebuilds the house, and that continuity, that survival means something. The Finnish neighbors who show up at the end are only on screen for maybe a minute or two, but they represent something crucial. They are the community that Atami thought he would lose, the proof that kindness and cooperation still exist in the world, that not everything has to be violence and death. The lead neighbor tells Atami they want to help him build, and then adds, "You don't have to say anything," which is such a perfect acknowledgement of who Atami is, this silent man who communicates through action rather than words. These guys don't need Atami to thank them or explain himself, they just want to help, and that simple decency is what finally breaks through Atami's armor. As for the various Soviet soldiers who get killed throughout the film, they are not really developed as individual characters. They are more like video games, enemies, obstacles for Atami to overcome. But that's appropriate for this kind of movie. We don't need to know their backstories or motivations. They are representatives of the Soviet military machine, and their job is to provide targets for Atami's particular set of skills. The sheer number of skills in this movie, I have seen estimates ranging from 100 to 200 on screen deaths, is staggering. But each death is choreographed and executed, no pun intended, in creative ways that keep it from becoming repetitive. The primary theme of Caesar Road to Revenge is the idea of home and what it means to belong somewhere. Atami is literally carrying his home piece by piece across hostile territory, trying to rebuild it in a place where it will be safe, where the memories it represents can be honored. That's not just a plot device, that's thematic storytelling at its finest. Helander is exploring what home means when you have been displaced, when the physical location of home has been taken from you by forces beyond your control. For Atami, home is not a place, it's these wooden beams that he and his family built together. It's the craftsmanship and love that went into creating shelter. By transporting and rebuilding it, he is asserting that home is portable, that it's defined by memory and intention rather than geography. This theme is incredibly relevant today when you think about refugees, about displaced peoples all around the world who have lost their homes to war or climate change or political upheaval. The films ask, what do you take with you when you can't go back? What do you preserve? And how do you create a new home while honoring the old one? The film explores this theme through every single action sequence. Atami is not fighting for glory or revenge initially. He is fighting to protect those wooden beams when the truck catches fire and he stops to put it out while being shot at. That's showing his priorities when he builds raft out of the lumber after the truck goes into a ocean. He is demonstrating his refusal to abandon what matters. The lumber is heavy, it's cumbersome, it makes him target, but he never considered leaving it behind because it's all he has left of his family. That commitment to memory, to the physical remnants of, is the beating heart of this movie. Now, is this theme handled well? I think it's handled beautifully because Helander never over explains it. There's no scene where Atami talks about the house means to him because Atami does not talk. We understand thorough the care he takes through his willingness to suffer and die to protect these pieces of wood. That's real storytelling, that's trusting your audience to understand metaphor and symbolism. My interpretation of this theme is that Hollander is saying home is something you carry with you. It's something you rebuild. It's not tied to land or borders, but to memory and commitment. When the neighbors show up at the end to help rebuild, that's the film's thesis statement. Home is also community. It's other people choosing to be part of your story to help you create something meaningful. That's a powerful message, especially in our current moment when so many people feel displaced or disconnected. The film suggests that even after tremendous loss, even after the worst imaginable. It's possible to rebuild, not to replace that what was lost, but to honor it by creating something new. That's why the ending is so moving. It's not just that Atami survived and got revenge. It's that he found a way back to human connection, to being part of something larger than his own pain. The depth of thematic exploration here is remarkable for what's ostensibly a B-move action thriller. Hollander has given us a film that works perfectly well on the surface as pure visceral entertainment, but that also has these deeper currents running underneath for anyone willing to engage with. The social and political commentary in Sisu Road to Revenge is more subtle than in a lot of films, but it's definitely there if you're looking for it. Is explicitly dealing with the aftermath of World War II, with the forced displacement of Finnish peoples from Karelia after the Union annexed that territory. This is real history. Tens of thousands of Finns were forced to relocate, and many never saw their homes again. Just like the opening narration tells us, by censoring a story no one man's attempt to reclaim and transport his home, Hollander is commenting on the human cost of geopolitical decisions, the way ordinary people suffer when nations redraw borders and make treaties. Achami did not choose any of this. He is a victim of circumstances far beyond his control, and his response to take what he can and build elsewhere is an act of resistance against historical forces that want to erase him. There's also commentary here on the nature of legends and how government use mythology to control populations. The Soviets have turned Atami into Koshchei, this immortal boogeyman, partially out of fear, but also as a way of explaining their failure. If the man who killed 300 of their soldiers is supernatural, then it's not the soldiers' fault that they died. It's not a failure of the Soviets or tactics, it's just this unstoppable force of nature. By creating this legend, they are absolving themselves of responsibility. But Atami is not supernatural, he's just incredibly skilled and determined. And the film subtly critiques the way institutions create myths rather than confronting hard truths. The Red Army's response to Atami, throwing increasingly absurd military resources at him, fighter jets and tanks and missiles, is both thrilling action and critique authoritarian power. The way these systems will destroy anything that threatens their narrative of control. The film's relevance to current events is interesting. We are living in a time of renewed border conflicts, of displacement and refugee crisis, of people fighting to preserve their homes and cultures in the face of overwhelming force. Atami's journey resonates because it's fundamentally about maintaining identity and memory in impossible circumstances, about refusing to let history erase you. Now, is the film heavy handed with its social commentary? Not at all. Helander is not making a didactic political statement. He is telling a story that happens to be rooted in real historical context. And the themes emerge naturally from that story. If you want to watch this purely as an action movie, you can, and it works great. But if you want to engage with the deeper political and social dimensions, they are there. Historical parallels are abound. You can look at the Yugoslav wars and the displacement of populations there, the partition of India, the ongoing refugee crisis in the Middle East and Central America, any situation where people are forced from their homes by forces they can't control. Atami's small scale personal response, saving what he can and starting over, is what millions of real people have had to do throughout history. The cultural significance of this film, particularly in Finland, is worth nothing. Sisu is a deeply Finnish concept. It's a part of national identity, and these films celebrate that in a way that's resonant for Finnish audiences. While also being accessible to international viewers, my take on the messaging is that Helander is advocating for the importance of memory, of community, of refusing to give up even when the world tells you you are a beaten. That's not a controversial message, but it's one that's delivered with real sincerity and emotional weight. Let's talk about the symbolism running through this movie because there's actually quite a bit of it. The most obvious symbol is the house itself. Those wooden beams that Atami is transporting on a literal level, it's just building materials, but symbolically. It represents his family, his past, his identity, everything he's lost, and everything he is trying to preserve. The fact that the house is dismantled, broken down in individual pieces, mirrors Atami's own psychological state. He's been broken by trauma, by loss, and the act of rebuilding the house is parallel to his own process of putting himself back together. When the wood catches fire at various points in the film, there's the threat of his memories being destroyed, of losing even the physical remnants of his family. When he protects the wood, he is protecting his own humanity and connection to who he was before the war. The dog is another symbol representing loyalty and innocence. In a world of violence and betrayal, the dog is the one constant, the one being who remains faithful without agenda or expectation. The dog never questions Atami, never abandons him, just stays by his side through every trial. That unconditional loyalty is something Atami can't find in human relationship anymore, and it's precious to him. There's also symbolic weight to the journey itself, moving from Soviet territory to Finland, from occupied land to free land. That's a journey from oppression to liberation, from death to life, from past to future. Every obstacle Atami overcomes on this journey represents another step toward emotional and psychological healing. The Soviet soldiers are not just enemies, they are manifestations of the forces that destroyed his life, and defeating them in therapeutic in a sense, reclaiming agency in a world that took everything from him. Color symbolism is subtle but present. The film is dominated by muted earth tones, bronze and grays and dull greens, reflecting the post war bleakness of the setting. When we see fire, it's bright orange and red, this vivid splash of destruction against a dry landscape. The color palette reinforces the emotional tone, everything is cold and harsh and unforgiving. Real metaphors abound. There's a shot early on of Atami's shadow falling across the ruins of his home, and that shadow is long and dark, suggesting the weight of grief he carries. Later, when he's building the raft out of the lumber, he is literally constructing something useful out of destruction, finding a way to keep moving forward using the tools available to him. That's a metaphor for resilience, for adapting to circumstances. Recurring motifs include fire and water as opposing forces. Fire threatens to destroy the wood, Atami's memories, while water provides both danger when the truck goes off the cliff and salvation when he uses the lumber as a raft. These elements are in constant tension throughout the film. One detail most people probably missed is the number 7. The film has 7 chapters, and 7 is significant in various cultural contexts, often representing completion or perfection. 7 days in a week, 7 deadly sins, 7 witches. By structuring the film into 7 chapters, Helander might be suggesting that this is a complete journey, a full cycle from loss to renewal. Whether that was intentional or just coincidentally poetic, I'm not sure, but it adds another layer to the viewing experience. The knife that Atami buries in his leg is symbolic of sacrifice and foresight, the willingness to endure pain now for future gain. It's also a perfect encapsulation of Sisu, that determination to do whatever is necessary, no matter the cost. These symbolic elements work because they are integrated into the story naturally. Helander is not hitting you over the head with them, they are just there, enriching the narrative for anyone paying attention. The emotional core of Sisu Road to Revenge is grief and the struggle to honor the dead while continuing to live. Atami is trapped in this liminal space where he can't move on from his family's death, but he also can't wallow in despair because he has a mission to rebuild their home. The film evokes a range of emotions, and surprisingly, for an ultra violent action movie, many of those emotions are tender. There's sadness in watching Atami work alone, this solitary figure trying to preserve something that's already gone. There's tension and excitement during the action sequences, obviously, as we watch him overcome impossible odds. There's satisfaction when he gets revenge on Dragoner, that primal catharsis of seeing justice done. And there's genuine warmth and hope in that final scene when the neighbors arrive to help. The most powerful moment in the film for me is that ending. When Atami sees these men approaching, he dances, ready for another fight. And then they offer help instead. The look on Jorma Tommila's face, the tears forming, the slight smile, it destroys me every time. It's such a simple gesture, offering to help someone build something, but in the construct of everything, Atami has been thorough. It's overwhelming. He spent the entire movie hull, probably years of his life, in survival mode, fighting, killing, protecting, and here are people who want nothing from him except to be good neighbors. That breaks through all these defenses. Why does it hit so hard? Because it's unexpected kindness in a brutal world, because it represents human connection after prolonged isolation, because it shows that even after the worst trauma, people can still surprise you with generosity. The universal themes at play here are loss, grief, resilience, and community. Everyone something or someone important. Everyone has felt isolated or overwhelmed. Everyone has needed help and been surprised. Was offered. Atami's journey is extreme. Obviously, most of us are not transporting dismantled houses across war zones, but the emotional landscape he's navigating is familiar. The cathartic elements are significant. Watching Atami kill Dragunov is not just cool action, it's emotional release. This is the man who murdered his family, and seeing him obliterated by a missile is satisfying on a deep psychological level. Revenge fantasies exist because they provide a sense of justice and closure that real life often doesn't. And then the film goes beyond simple revenge, offering something more healing in that final community scene. It's saying revenge is not enough. You need connection. You need to build something rather than just destroying. That sophisticated emotional storytelling for a movie where protagonist doesn't speak. Jalmari Helander direction on this film is absolutely masterful, and I don't use that word lightly. This is a director who knows exactly what he wants to achieve, and he has the skill to execute it flawlessly. Highlander's vision for this sequel was to take the core concept of the first film, the silent Finnish badass versus overwhelming odds, and escalating while also deepening the emotional resonance. He succeeds on both counts. The action is bigger, more varied, more creative than in the first film, moving from truck chases to motorcycle pursuits to aerial dogfights to tank flips to train sequences. Each set piece feels distinct, really interesting, and escalates naturally from what came before. But Highlanders also make sure we never lose sight of why we care, that emotional thorough line about Atami trying to honor his family's memory. The execution quality is superb, every shot is purposeful, every edit is precise, the pacing never drags. Highlander has talked in interviews about how he storyboarded this entire film meticulously, planning each sequence shot by shot, and that preparation shows. There's confidence to the filmmaking, a sense that every decision was deliberate. Best directional choices. The chapter structure is brilliant because it allows the film to feel episodic, almost like a video game where you are progressing through different levels while still maintaining narrative momentum. Breaking the story into these discrete sections, each with its own title and flavor, gives the audience natural breathing points and makes the 88 minutes runtime feel perfectly balanced. Another great choice is the decision to keep Atami completely silent. That could have been a gimmick, but Highlander commits to it fully and uses that silence to create this mythological quality around the chapter. What could have been better? Honestly, not much. If I'm really nitpicking, some of the CGI in the fighter jet sequences is a little noticeable, not bad, but you can tell it's not all practical given the budget constraints, that understandable, and it doesn't distract significantly from the experience. Some viewers might want a bit more character development for Dragonov, a few more scenes exploring his backstory or motivations, but I would argue that restraint is actually a strength. Hollander gives us just enough to understand Dragonov without letting him take over the movie. This is Atami's story, and Hollander never lost sight of that. Signature moments that define Highlander's style include the use of wide shots to establish geography and scale before cutting into closer action. The way he uses silence and sound to create tension, and his willingness to embrace cartoonish violence without winking at the camera. Compared to his other work, and Hollander's filmography includes stuff like Rare, Exports, and Big Game. This feels like his most mature and confident film. He's always been good at mixing genres and tones. But here's he is fully in control, balancing brutal action with genuine emotion in a way that feels seamless. You can see the influence of Sam Raimi in the willingness to go over the top. You can see Sergio Leone in the mythological quality of protagonist. You can see George Miller in the vehicular mayhem. But it all comes together into something that feels distinctly Highlander's own voice. The director absolutely nailed the tone, walking this tightrope between serious and absurd, between grounded and cartoonish, and never falling off. That's incredibly difficult to do, and the fact that he pulls it off make this film special. The cinematography by Micah Oresma is absolutely stunning, and it's a huge part of why this film works so well. Oresma and Helander clearly have a strong working relationship and a vision for how this movie should look. The visual style is gritty and naturalistic, but with moments of almost epic grandeur. Wide shots of the Estonian landscape doubling for post-war Karelia are gorgeous. All these rolling hills and forests and open skies. The camera often pulls back to show Atami struck as this teeny speck in a vast, hostile environment, emphasizing his isolation and the enormity of his task. Then we cut in close for the action, handheld cameras that get right into the chairs, and the contrast between these wide, majestic establishing shots and the intimate, violent close ups create a visual rhythm that's incredibly engaging. Camera work highlights include the motorcycle chase sequence, where Oresma uses these tracking shots that keep pace with the vehicles while also showing the surrounding terrain, giving you a real sense of speed and space. There shows shot during the fighter jet attack where the camera is inside the barn with Atami looking up through the gaps in the roof as bombs falls and is terrifying and beautiful simultaneously. The train sequence uses a lot of long takes and steady cam work gliding through the cars as Atami navigates past sleeping soldiers, and the smoothness of these shots contrast with the tension of the situation. The color palette is deliberately muted, lots of browns and grays and darks greens, which makes the occasional splash of color like bright red blood or orange fire really pop and grab your attention. This is not a color movie, it's drab and bleak, which is appropriate for the post war setting. Lighting is used really effectively to create mood. A lot of the film takes place in overcast, daylight, flat, and grey, which gives everything this oppressive feel. The train sequence at night uses limited motivated lighting from lanterns and moonlight, creating these pools of light and shadow add to the suspense. Visual storytelling quality is high. Helander and Erasmus trust the images to convey information without relying on dialogue or exposition. When we see Atomic carefully marking the beams of wood, we understand what he doing and why without anyone explaining it. When we see his dog looking up at him with complete trust, we understand their relationship. That cinema, using visual language to communicate. There's no significant animation in this film since it's live action. But the practical effects and stunt work are top tier. Real explosions, real vehicle, real stunt performers, and you can feel and the weight and the danger of that. Technical innovations might be too strong a word, but Helander and Oresma to find creative solutions to budget limitations, using careful framing and editing to make action sequences feeling bigger and more expensive than they probably. Visually, this movie is absolutely gorgeous in a harsh, unforgiving way. It's not pretty, it's not glamorous, but it's striking. Every frame feels composed, considered, nothing looks accidental. The most beautiful shots are probably those wide landscape vistas with Atami's truck cutting across them, or where he is building the raft on the beach with the ocean behind him, or that final image of him and his neighbors building the house against clear sky. Orasma's work elevates this material significantly, turning what could have been a standard looking action movie into something that's visually distinctive and memorable. The score for Sisu Road to Revenge is composed by Juri Sepa and Thomas Venola, the same team from the first film, and they knocked it out of the park again. The music is this propulsive driving force that enhances every scene without overwhelming it. It's got this Eastern European folk influence mixed with modern action movie percussion and strings, creating a sound that's both rooting into the setting And contemporary, the score effectiveness is off the charts. It ramps up tension during action sequences, provides emotional weight during quieter moments, and never feels intrusive or manipulative. Best musical moments include the main theme that plays during the opening credits, this dark, brooding piece that sets the tone perfectly, and the triumphant, almost hopeful music that plays during the final scene when the neighbors arrive to help. That shift in musical tone from dark and vengeful to warm and communal underscores the emotional arc of the film. How music enhances scene is crucial to the film's impact. During the motorcycle chase, the music is fast and rhythmic, matching the pace of the action and your heartbeat. During the fighter jet sequence, it's more orchestral and epic, befitting the scale of what's happening on screen. During the train sequence, it's suspenseful and minimal, using silence and sparse notes to create tension. The composers understand that sometimes less is more, that you don't need wall to wall music, that strategic silence can be just as powerful. There are no song choices, no needle drops, which is appropriate for a film set in 1946 but also keeps the focus on the original score. Sound design quality is phenomenal. Every gunshot, every explosion, every crunch of metal or splinter of wood sounds meaty and impactful. The sound mix is excellent. You can hear dialogue where there is dialogue clearly, but you also feel the low rumble of explosions in your chest, the crack of gunfire making you flinch. Audio mixing is balanced perfectly. Nothing is drawn out, everything sits in the mix right where it should. The composer's work deserves serious praise. Sipa and Vanola have created a score that's memorable, emotionally resonant, and perfectly tailored to this specific film. I have found myself humming themes from this movie days after watching it, which is always a sign of effective film music. Most memorable tracks are the main theme, the motorcycle chase theme, and that final scene music, which is just beautiful. If they release a soundtrack album, I'm buying it immediately. The music and sound work together to create this immersive experience where you are just not watching the action, you are feeling it viscerally. That's what great film sound does. It makes the experience physical and emotional, not just visual. The screenplay by Jalmari Helander is lean, mean, and incredibly efficient. This is a masterclass in minimalist storytelling, how to convey a complete narrative with emotional depth using a few words as possible. Script quality overall is excellent. Every scene serves a purpose, either advancing the plot, developing character, or building tension. There's no fat on this screenplay, no unnecessary subplots or filler. Dialogue strength is interesting to assess because there's so little dialogue in the film. Atami does not speak at all, which means the dialogue that does exist, primarily from Dragunov and the KGB officer, has to do every heavy lifting. Stephen Lang's monologue about killing Atami's family is probably the longest single piece of dialogue in the movie, and it's chilling and effective. The KGB officer's exposition about Koshche and the legend of Atamis is delivered in a way that feels natural, like one character explaining the situation to another rather than writer explaining to the audience. Pacing is absolutely perfect. At 88 minutes, the film doesn't waste a single second. We get a brief setup, then we are into the action, and it doesn't let up until the very end. Some might want it to be longer to spend more time with character or explore subplots. But I would argue the brevity is a strength. This film knows exactly what it is and doesn't overstay its welcome. It's like a great short story versus a novel. Sometimes you don't need more pages, you just need every page to count. Plot holes, let me think. Are there logical inconsistencies? Sure. If you want to be pedantic about physics and realism, you can poke holes all day. How does Atamis survive being blown up so many times? How does he catapult a tank through the air? How does he build a functioning raft so quickly? But here's the thing, those are not plot holes, they are conventions. This is operating in the realm of heightened reality like a comic book or a Looney Tunes cartoon, and within that framework, everything makes internal sense. Atami survives because he's Atami, because he embodies Sisu, and that's all the explanation we need. Narrative structure is brilliant with the chapter format. Each chapter functions almost like a mini movie with its own beginning, middle, and end, its own distinct flavor and set piece. Motor mini movie with its own beginning, middle, and end, its own distinct flavor and set piece. Motor Mayhem is the vehicle chase chapter, Incoming is the aerial assault chapter, Revenge is the stealth and confrontation chapter. This structure keeps the film feeling fresh and prevents action fatigue. Character writing quality is strong for the main character. Atami is fully realized thorough action rather than words. Dragunov is given enough depth, thorough, length performance, and the few scenes he has to feel like a real threat with understandable motivations. The sporting characters are sketched in quickly and efficiently, just enough detail to serve their purpose in the story. Best written scenes include that opening sequence with Atami dismantling the house, which is wordless but tells us everything we need to know. The KGB officer recreating Dragunov, which sets up the stakes efficiently. Dragunov's monologue on the train, which is horrifying and perfectly executed. And the final scene with the neighbors, which is touching without being sappy. Weakest writing moments. There really are not any glaring weakness. If I am stretching, maybe some of these Soviet soldiers could have been given a bit more personality, but that's not really the point of this movie. They are meant to be obstacles, not characters. The screenplay succeeds because it understands the story it's telling and tells it with absolute confidence and clarity. Helander knows that plot should serve character and theme, that spectacle should have emotional stakes, and that sometimes silence is more powerful than any dialogue could be. This is economical, intelligent screenwriting that represents the audience's ability to understand real storytelling. Let's talk numbers. Because the box office story of Caesar Road to Revenge is really interesting and kind of disappointing, but also not unexpected. The film opened in the United States on November 21st, 2025, Thanksgiving week in approximately 2100 locations. That a significantly wider release than the first Sisu, which had a much more limited rollout. Thursday night previews brought $575,000, which is modest but okay for an R-rated Finnish action sequel. Then we get to the opening weekend, and this is where things get rough. The film grossed only $2.6 million over its first 3 days, which is actually a 21.9% drop from the first film's $3.3 million opening. Despite having way more theaters, that's not good. By Thanksgiving weekend, the film's box office was down 66%, averaging just $365 per screen, which is abysmal. The film ended its theatrical run with a total worldwide gross of around $9.7 million dollars against a budget of approximately $12 million, making it a financial disappointment by traditional metrics. Why did it perform this way? Several factors. First, the first Sisu, while beloved by action fans, wasn't a mainstream hit. It did well for what it was, but it didn't break out culturally the way John Wick did. So the built-in audience for a sequel was always going to be limited. Second, the November release date put it up against Wicked for Good, which was dominating the box office. Family audiences and musical fans were flocking to Wicked, and Sisu Road to Revenge is about as far from a family friendly musical as you can get. The counter programming didn't work. Third, and this is important, Finnish action movies are a tough sell in the American market. We love Scandinavian and the Scandinavian crime dramas, but ultra-violent Finnish action films with minimal dialogue don't have a proven track record. Fourth, the marketing was limited unless you were actively following action movie news or film festival coverage. You probably didn't even know this movie existed. Domestic versus international split. I don't have exact breakdowns, but we know the film made 2.6 million domestically in its opening weekend and ended with 9.7 million total worldwide, which suggests it's actually did okay internationally relative to its domestic performance. Finland obviously would have been a strong market, and other European countries probably contributed significantly. Total worldwide gross of 9.7 million against a $12 million budget means the film lost money theoretically, but that's where digital and streaming come in. The film was released digitally on December 16th, 2025, less than a month after its theatrical release, and I would bet it's finding a much larger audience on those platforms. Records broken, none. This is not a record setting film commercially. Profitability analysis depends on how you calculate it. If you only look at theoretical, it's lows. But if you factor in digital sales, streaming rights, international television, physical media, the film might end up profitable long term. And honestly, profitability is not everything. This film has already cemented its place as a cult classic, and cult classics tends to find audience eventually and continuing generating revenue for years. Why it performed this way comes down to market realities. The audience for hardcore action movies is substantial but not huge, and that audience is increasingly watching at home rather than in theaters. Sisu Road to Revenge is a kind of movie that's perfect for streaming, for discovering on a platform and telling your friends about, for rewatching with a group of people who appreciate brutal action. It's less suited to theatrical release in a today's market where most people are only going to theaters for huge event films compared to expectations. Yeah, this underperformed. Sony probably hoped for at least 20-30 million worldwide based on the increased budget and wider release, but it didn't come close. Franchise implications are uncertain. Helander has said he is open to a third film if the money is there, but given this performance, it's hard to see a studio a smaller scale, maybe direct to streaming, which honestly might be fine. These films don't need huge budget to work, they need creative action, choreography, and committed filmmaking, both of which Helander can deliver at any budget level. Now here's where things get much more positive. Critically, Sisu Road to Revenge is a huge success. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film has 95% positive reviews from 95 critics, which is outstanding. The critical consensus reads Sisu Road to Revenge consistently and creatively kills the competition, which is a great pull quote. On Metacritic, it has a score of 76 out of 100 based on 19 critics, indicating generally favorable reviews. These are generally strong scores, especially for an action sequel. Critics recognized what Highlander was doing there. The craftsmanship, the escalation, the emotional underpinning. What critics praised most was the action, choreography, and creativity. Reviews consistently highlighted how each set piece feels distinct and inventive, how Helander finds new ways to stage violence that feel fresh. Critics also praised Jorma Tommila's performance, nothing how much emotion and character he conveys without dialogue. Stephen Lang's villain were got a lot of love too, with critics appreciating the meanness and occasional pathos he brings to Dragonov. The pacing and economical storytelling were frequently cited as strengths. The way the film gets in, tells the story, and gets out without dragging or feeling bloated. What critics hated or criticized, and there's always something tending to focus on the cartoonish violence potentially being too much for some viewers. Several reviews mentioned that if you are not on board with the Looney Tunes logic of Atami's survival, you are going to bounce off this film hard. A few critics felt the film didn't quite match the original Sisu in terms of novelty. that there's an element of diminishing returns when you do the some basic formula twice. And a couple of reviews noted that the lack of character development for anyone besides Atami and Dragonov makes a film feel a bit shallow if you are looking for complex drama. These are fair criticism, but they are also kind of missing the point. This is an action movie that happens to have depth, not a drama that happens to have action. Awards and nominations. As of my knowledge, the film has not garnered significant awards attention at a genre specific festival and awards. Maybe some technical nominations for stunts or sound designs if there are categories for that, but don't expect it at the Oscars. My agreement or disagreement with critics is that I think they got it mostly right. The 95% on Rotten Tomatoes feels accurate. This is a film that succeeds at what it's trying to do. The 76 Metacritic score is also fair. It's very good film within its genre but not a transcendent masterpiece that appeals to everyone. I might personally rate it a bit higher because I am action movie junkie, but I can acknowledge that it's a specific taste. Critics who complained about the violence being excessive are probably right that this won't work for general audiences, but anyone buying a ticket to Scissor or to Revenge knows what they are getting into, so that criticism feels a bit redundant. Audience scores tells a slightly different story than critic scores, which is interesting. On Rotten Tomatoes, the audience score is 87% positive from 500 plus verified ratings, which is strong but notably lower than the 95% critic score. That gap is unusual. Typically, we see the opposite with action films, audiences loving them while critics are dismissive. On CinemaScore, the audiences polled on opening night gave it a B average, which is actually kind lukewarm for an action movie. For context, John Wick Chapter 4 got an A negative. Nobody got a B positive, so B is okay but not great. Post track scores were better, 4.5 out of 5 stars, suggesting that people who sought it out generally enjoyed it. Social media buzz for the film was modest, not a huge viral sensation, but definitely passionate within the action movie community. On the film Twitter and Letterboxd, people who saw it were enthusiastically recommending it, sharing their favorite kills and moments. There were some viral clips, particularly the tank flip scene and some of the motorcycle chase stuff that circulated and got people talking. Controversies were minimal. There was some discussion about the violence being gratuitous, some folks questioning whether it's okay to enjoy this level of gore and brutality, but that's a perennial debate around action movies and didn't really impact the film's reception. There was also a bit of discourse around the depiction of Soviet soldiers as faceless cannon fodder, some arguing it dehumanizes the enemy, but others countered that this is a revenge fantasy and genre conventions apply. Viral moments included that tank flip, which everyone was sharing with captions like Movie of the Year or Peak Cinema, and the Dragoner's death via missile, which people found incredibly satisfying. The final scene with the neighbors also got some love, people posting screenshots and talking about how unexpectedly moving it was. General General public sentiment among those who actually saw the film is overwhelmingly positive. This is not a film that lots of people saw, but the people who did see it mostly loved it. There's this passionate core audience that already rewatching it, analyzing it, recommended it to friends. Audiences love this because it delivers exactly what it promises: relentless, creative action with enough heart to make you care. Audiences who didn't love it tended to fall into two camps: people who found the violence too much or too silly, and people who wanted more plot or character development. But again, If you are going into a movie called Sisu Road to Revenge about a silent Finnish commando fighting the Soviet army and you are expecting Schindler's List levels of dramatic depth, that's kind of on you for having misaligned expectations. The production of Sisu Road to Revenge is fascinating when you dig into it because this was not an easy film to make. Unlike the first Sisu, which was shot in Lapland in northern Finland, this one was filmed in Estonia. Estonia was chosen because it could double for the Karelania region in 1940s and also because they have the pretty robust film infrastructure and crew base. Filming in Estonia also helped with budget. Shooting in Finland is expensive. Estonia offered cost savings while still providing the right look. Production challenges were significant, the biggest being coordinating all the practical stunts and effects. Helander wanted to do as much particularly as possible,